Boosted.
How is everyone doing? All good? Hello. Yeah, nice. Let's see if we can get this to work too. Maybe. It's all good? Yeah. All right. Cool. So I am going to be talking about building the ideal service for free and open source software. Let's just go on. I am Victor. You already know that. I've been working on a lot of different things before. I didn't start out as a developer. I started being a developer maybe, I don't know, 7 years or something when I first moved to Barcelona from Sweden. Now I'm just hacking on things that I find interesting, and open services and open registry is one of these projects that I'm now trying to focus my time on building. So there are two different things that I'm going to be talking about. First is open services as a concept, which kind of doesn't touch on JavaScript really. So I'm really sorry if you expected me to talk about JavaScript a bunch, but we're going to start with open services and what that is. So it's a framework for running FOSS services. It's basically a collection of ideas to be able to run these services in a way that makes sense for people who are doing open source or free software. But before, I'm going to talk about why do we need this? Why am I building this? So the first thing is that the infrastructure that we are currently running today should be run in the same spirit that the FOSS software is being built. So currently we have a lot of the open source work done today is done on servers and services that are actually made by for-profit companies, and they are not publishing the source. Maybe they are publishing some libraries and other things, but their entire code base is not open source. So that would be things like GitHub, for example, which probably everyone here uses GitHub. Is there someone who doesn't use GitHub? No hands. For the record, it's no hands. And then another problem, so we have GitHub where a lot of developers are using, and we have things like the NPM registry as well, which is run by a for-profit company, but they have an open service, which is the NPM registry. Anyone can publish a package, which is fine, and that works great. But in the end, they are also providing another service, as they can't really earn money on giving away stuff for free. So they need to have some edge where you can pay them, so they get a profit, so they can then return that money to their investors, and the owners can continue with their happy life. But unfortunately, the open part or the free part is depending that they can actually turn a profit on the closed source part. And sometimes it's not even enough that they turn a profit. They need to have a high profit. They need to make enough money for people to feel happy about it, and especially the investors. So there is a mismatch in how we're setting up all these services that we're depending on. Also, another point is that the centralization and collaboration is a people problem. It's not a technological one. So ideally, everything would run in a distributed network or a decentralized network, and everyone would be happy, and everyone can have the same ability to create a good platform. So Bitcoin, for example, everyone has a level playing field, but that doesn't mean that everyone is running their own full node of Bitcoin, right? Right now, there is a small amount of parties who are controlling maybe not controlling the network, but they're standing for most of the hash power. So essentially what we're doing with decentralization is just repeating this pattern we have already in society, probably related to the capitalism in general and currencies. So we're just repeating the same thing. So obviously, just building a decentralized network is not going to fix the problem of centralization. We're just going to end up with centralized entities in the same way. So one example would be the internet. The internet is kind of decentralized today, where everyone can set up their own links and stuff like that. But the web itself is centralized, right? They had the ability to build it in a decentralized way, but they didn't, because we have companies. So in the end, we have the same problem. And then another thing is to try to see things in a longer term. So to replicate things that we take for granted today, like health service, maybe not in all places, like the US, but in Sweden and in other places, we have universal healthcare where everyone can get healthcare. And here in Portugal, the police is a public service that you might not need every day, but you feel fine giving your taxes because it helps a lot of other people. So trying to replicate this long-term thing where we can help each other, even though we don't have the ability to directly help each other by physical means or other things. And then every time someone is creating these services that are open but closed, they're going to have to reinvest time in setting up the infrastructure, setting up all these patterns, and everything is just being repeated and a lot of time wasted on this. So we have to kind of relate it with the long-term public utilities or services. We have to find the balance between long-term or stagnation, because many people feel that if you have a government-sponsored entity doing something like electricity and they're paying for things, in the end they're gonna advance more slow than a for-profit company, right? The for-profit company is gonna move fast because they need to earn a profit, and they're gonna rush out and they have to eat the world, otherwise the companies disappear, while the public utilities is on the other side of the spectrum where it's so safe for them that they don't really have to improve. They just have to maintain the status quo, and then they call that good enough. So finding some sort of balance between the long-term, still improving, but not finding this stagnation. So in my dream world, these would be the features of the ideal FOSS service. Yes. First thing is, it works. It does stuff, right? It has a functionality that actually helps you as a developer. The second thing is that it's independent. It does not depend on a different entity to be able to survive. One example here would be the recent acquisition of GitHub and Microsoft, for example, which is very cool because now GitHub doesn't have to worry about turning a profit anymore, right? They can just be there and relax, and Microsoft will just continue to pay forever for this. But it also means that people who are using GitHub, they have no way of signaling this. They can't pay for GitHub and make Microsoft keep it. In the end, if Microsoft ends up having to decide if they're going to build a feature that would make them more profitable compared to expanding GitHub and make lives easier for developers, if they are in a financial situation, they would go with the way that they have to create features to create more profit, right? It makes sense. And it's a for-profit company, right? They have the right to do that, and it makes sense. But does it make sense for FOSS developers to rely on these services to be able to do their work? I don't think so. So the way to do that would be to have independent entities, every service to be independent from each other. And yeah, this is something that I'm kind of like, I'm torn on myself, exactly how, like on what scope you're going with this. But in general, it should be available in one way or another for free. And I don't mean free as in free software, but gratis. You should not have to pay for it. But then you can have other problems if you have a service without any limits, right? If you have a file storage upload thingy and people can just upload gigabytes of data, it's going to make the service more expensive. So you need to have a balance between limiting it, but not limiting it as well. So my current thinking is to say that features should be applied for should be available for everyone, but if you have limits that you can have as parameters like bandwidth or storage, that will be fine to split up in a different way. And then FOSS service should obviously be transparent, not just that you know what they're doing, but the whole thing from financing to the infrastructure to the metrics to the development to the governance, everything in the project should be transparent, and there is no reason it shouldn't. Obviously, it has to be FOSS. It has to be either free software or open source software. This is not the talk maybe to argue for that, but it should be that. Everyone should be able to help. Everyone can help. That doesn't mean that you should just merge whatever PR you see and like, yeah, sounds cool. But there should be a pipeline for people to be able to contribute in all the different things that the service is doing, from marketing to the design to the documentation and everything in between there. And it should have a focus on being long-term. There should be no decisions that are focused on just, yeah, this would be cool for Twitter, so let's just do this cool hacky thing and then people will love us. No, you should be thinking that if this feature would be there in 10 years, would it still be relevant? Would it still continue to work? And it should be cheap to operate as well. Obviously, because it doesn't have the same motive as a for-profit company. The infrastructure should be cheap to operate, and the developers who are making the choices, or the infrastructure developers, they should be able to, or they have to take all this into consideration when they're developing things, that it's actually cheap to run. So not this typical VC-invested startup where you just say, no, money doesn't matter, let's just do something quick now and then continue. No, it has to be from the beginning that you are thinking about the budget that you have available. The environment itself should be reproducible and automated. So at any point, people should be able to come and go from the project, and you should not stop the project from continuing. If I set up a service today, and let's say I get hit by a bus, the project should still be able to just merge a pull request, and the infrastructure automatically updates, right? And people should be able to reproduce the environment in their own environments if they would like to. There should also be a way for the users to use all of this, maybe not all, but most of the functionality local, not just remote, right? So the npm inc package registry, for example, normally does not provide any way for you to use the package or the search locally, probably because they want to have the metrics, and if you're using it locally, they don't get the same metrics. So the ideal FOSS service should be able to continue to work in an offline environment or in a local environment where you just have two laptops on the same Wi-Fi without the internet. They should still be able to communicate with each other. So the thing that I'm working on now is called the Open Services Framework. This is the first version that I'm working on, and it has a few parts. So the first one is finance. The service itself has to be self-funded. It should not be funded by other entities or other open services. It has to be funded by its users via a donation model, for example. Right now it's using Open Collective. So the money collected from the Open Collective has to go to the service that the people are donating to. You cannot reuse funds in between the services. And sponsorships, I have not really reached a conclusion, but it looks like sponsorships should not be a part of the deal. Rather, if entities feel like the service should be continue to run, they should donate like everyone else. You should have a way of doing automatic payment of expenses. So let's say I set up some service today, rather than me paying the bill with my own credit card or whatever, the system should be set up to be able to function automatically without having any involvement from humans. So no one can be working on the project, but as long as people are funding the project should continue to run effortlessly. Together with the transparency, it has to have a public history of the financing. Everything from the invoicing to the expenses and income, all the details around the financing has to be public history that the public can access. And since the funds that the service is receiving is actually from normal private people, you have to be careful about the money, and it's a part of one of the pillars of open services to have efficient use of the funds. And the last point is to have a shutdown scenario in mind. Anything can happen with the service, right? The developers can stop having an interest in it, or maybe just the functionality itself is not interesting enough. So before starting before starting to run the actual service, the developers who are setting up the service has to think about what does happen with the money that we have collected so far, what happens with that money when or if we are shutting down. One example would be to donate it to a different service, or try to give it back to the users, donating it to I don't know, to another foundation or something. There has to be at least some thoughts around what happens with the money. And then the infrastructure part. So again, the infrastructure should be automatic. It should be able to continue to run by itself. There has to be a public introspection into the infrastructure. Usually, for example, the NPM registry, they provide some values for you as a developer that you can see if you know the right endpoints and whatever. But the developers on this project, they have special tools. They have tools that you don't have access to. They have metrics panels, they have alerts, and all of those kind of things. If you're running a public service for free and open source software, the other people should have the same way of introspecting the software. There is a certain like privacy concern around this, so you have to obviously like scrub all the data that can be attached to people. But in general, numbers and stuff should be shown. The secrets has to be shared as well. Is still continuing on this idea that the infrastructure should be able to continue to run for as long as possible. And then governance. The governance is basically like how you are running the project. So everything in the governance has to have transparency, that people are seeing why you are making a decision, how this decision came to be, what are we going to do if this doesn't work out, and all those kind of things, who is doing all these decisions, everything. It should be governed by the community. So currently there is a governance document that defines exactly who is what in the community and what kind of rights you have in the service, depending on what you're doing in the community, in the service. So right now in version 1 there are 3 different levels. You have like members, which are just people using the service. You have contributors who are actively helping the service to continue, and then you have leaders. Leaders are the people who have the final say. And then there is ways for the community to kind of impeach the leaders in case I go rogue. For example, I start being a spy or something. People should have a way of firing me without having to be a leader. So it's just like a catch area to prevent malicious behavior. And then obviously stuff changes, right? Entropy is everywhere. So we have to have in the governance, there has to be a way of migrating to the new rules of the governance, because eventually all these ideas I have about open services, some of them are wrong, some of the stuff I didn't even think of, so there will be a version 2. And there has to be a path to move to that way. And then the product, sorry, the product side of things. This is another thing I'm not fully sure about yet, but the current thinking is to not allow incompatible changes at all. So that means once you have written an API and the service is running, that API cannot do any changes like changing the keys or the properties, and you cannot remove values. This might sound weird, but the thinking is if you want a version 2 of a different API where the structure of the data is different, instead of changing the current service, you create a new service. You create a version 2 service. And then they have independent funding, and you will see if the users actually want the version 2 or not. The people who want to continue to run the version 1, they will continue to fund the version 1 product. If they want the version 2, they can change their funding to be for the version 2. Or if they need both of them to stay alive, they would just pay for both of them. That would allow us to avoid things like the feed reader from Google shutting down, even though a lot of people are using it, just because they don't want to maintain it anymore. If you're making a separation by version, we can actually continue to run services for as long as people want them to run. Combined with the other ideas around automation for the infrastructure, hopefully you don't have to do anything and the service will just continue to operate. Full export functionality has to be there if applicable. So a package registry, for example, should allow you to export all your packages and all the metadata around it. And if the shutdown is happening, that export should be automatic. The user should not have to do anything in case the service is shutting down. Maybe sometimes this doesn't make sense, like a paste bin, maybe, where you can, or like a gist thing where you don't have any email for the user, or you don't have any login at all. So maybe this doesn't make sense in those cases, but if it's possible, there should be an automatic export in case the service shuts down. And you should focus on being local first. You should only reach out to the internet and fetch stuff if it absolutely have to. So we want to minimize the bandwidth and enable people to use this in local networks or in other peer-to-peer networks or other things. And if it's possible, they should also be compatible with existing services. So for example, a package registry that you're building as an alternative to another one, you have to maintain, you have to be able to be compatible with that service. That's just to enable people to easily switch between them to try if they would like to. Otherwise, we're just building our own thing out in the nether. And the product has to focus on one category. So if I'm building a package registry, and then I think, oh yeah, some of the packages are malicious. Maybe we need to have an antivirus scan or some anti-scam scan. That, yeah, kind of anti-scam scan. If you are thinking of like adding these additional features that are not actually essential to the service, rather than embedding them into each other and making them depend on each other for funding and other things, you should separate them, and you should build a separate service. It could be compatible with the other one, but the important part is to separate the funding, so you get a really valuable signal if people actually want this. And it needs to have explicit phases. So what this means is that the service is not just a service and now it's running and now it's not running. It has a proper steps to go through, and a service is always in one of these phases. So we start by evaluating what the service is going to do, what will happen if we shut down the service, how can people migrate to it, how can people migrate away from it, and so on. After the evaluation has been done and we see that it actually provides some value for people, it will go into the starting phase. So that's when you're starting to build the service and you're trying to be compatible with the open services framework. So maybe you don't have public metrics in the starting phase, but before you reach the operating phase, you need to be compatible with all of the requirements from the open services framework before you can say that it's actually operating. And then, hopefully, the service would stay there until the end of time or the end of humankind, whichever comes first. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we do build the wrong things. And then we need to have a phase where we can actually say, no, it didn't work out. Now we're going to have to close down the service. And we start shutting down services and following the things that we figured out in the evaluating phase we had to do in case we're closing. Those happen now. And then after that, they are closed, and nothing else happens with the project. There is no more development, there is no more funding, and that's it. Maybe it makes sense in the future to re-evaluate and start from the beginning, but every open service goes through this flow. So this is the current status of where open services is right now. There is a version 1. It's not complete. I've done a couple of passes on it. I'm probably going to do a couple of more. And then it's locked. And then it's not going to change after that. It will be immutable. And then all the other ideas that come after this would be put in the next version of the open service framework. One thing that is my focus now is to make the voting easy, trying to figure out how people can vote on what they would like to happen in the service, who will be the leaders, basically trying to figure out a democratic system for the governance of the project. One very important thing is to figure out how to collaboratively build roadmaps. Usually what companies who do open source do is that they build a roadmap internally and then they show the community and they say, hey, this is what we're thinking about. And then people complain about it or they say it's great and then the company change some small details. But the community is not there from the beginning. I'm not sure if it's maybe roadmaps doesn't make sense. Maybe we need to have a global Kanban for everything to work. But we have to figure out a way to collaboratively figure out what we're going to do in the future. So this one very important thing. Automatic infrastructure, yes, that's what I'm working on right now. I'm creating a tool basically with Docker Compose that does all this automatic thing, and it will be simple to set up. And yeah, hopefully finish that soon. Automatic financing is a bit harder, having to interact with different server hosts and other things. But yeah. And then we come to Open Registry. So Open Registry is a package registry for free and open source service. Free and open source software. It will not be for private packages. It will not be made for the enterprise. It won't have any of those features. It's only for open source and free software or any other copyleft license you want. The features of this, the first obvious one is that it implements the Open Services Framework. That means it gets all these features with the finance and all those kind of things and transparency and all that. Right now, it's just a proxy to the NPM Inc. registry. So you basically make a request to Open Registry instead of NPM. Not very fun in general, but it's a stepping stone. So it's compatible with the existing registry that is now run by NPM Inc. Yeah. So then the future plans. First is to support multiple JavaScript registries. This was not our idea in the beginning, but now we do have multiple JavaScript registries. Thank you, GitHub. So we have to, well, we don't have to, but it will be nice to if it supports multiple different registries. The question is how to do that. Quite haven't figured out that yet. Maybe it would have a different naming with /npm/ the package name, and then we can throw in some other registries there as well. We will see. The second one is to be alternative for other for-profit registries. So not everyone is doing JavaScript. Some other people are doing Docker containers, and they are relying on Docker Hub, for example. Docker used to be a very open source friendly company, and they had the registry implementation was open source, and that was what they were running in production. Judging by the contributor graphics lately, they are not developing this anymore, but still they have new features in production. So something is telling me that they are not maintaining the open source version anymore. So that would be a registry that makes sense for us to step in and make it something that is truly open. Packagist is another registry for PHP packages that also would make sense. It's also driven by a for-profit company, and it's not very open. Also, to sign the packages, there is currently no way. Well, I think there is ways, but there is not an easy way for people to actually trust that the package is what they were requesting from that author. So adding signing would give you some additional trust in the package actually being deployed by the developer. But another thing we could do together with signed packages or without signed packages is to provide a build server for secure and reproducible builds. This is a bit tricky because we have the scripts in the package.json. We have the scripts where you can just add arbitrary Linux commands and do whatever you want. So instead, we might think of getting rid of that and having a DSL for building the packages. I don't know how this is going to look. We have an issue open for this. If you're interested, we would love to discuss it. Maybe also it makes sense to have a web of trust for finding trusted packages. It also comes maybe with a review system where I can say that I trust someone, that this person, if he has looked through the source of this package, I trust him that the package is actually what it says it is. So this is to prevent packages from just being viruses, basically. So finally, how do you use this? This is one way you can use it. You can just set your registry to be npm.openregistry.dev. Now you're using Open Registry. Everything will continue to work the same way. If you have a lock file, they have hard-coded URLs, so we still have to figure out a way of doing that. But if you run npm install a package, it will go to Open Registry and fetch it instead. Still, not very interesting, because it's the same thing you have today, right? So another way of using Open Registry is to use the peer-to-peer version of Open Registry. This requires you to have a different tool that proxies the requests via IPFS and libp2p. So this is how it would look. You basically install this CLI utility that once you run it, it starts a server and a HTTP server as well. And then you set your registry address to be localhost, and then everything is proxied. And this means that, for example, if I install a bunch of packages locally on my machine with Bolivar once, that means that those packages are available for everyone else who is running Bolivar as well. So if you use this in the office and the office internet goes down, but you're still connected to the wireless network, you can still fetch packages, even though you haven't had them on your laptop, because your colleague installed this isWindows package, for example. So that's a very, very cool thing. This is something that was a feature for the future, but since today, it's actually a feature of today. So it's called Palomo. It's a portable package registry that you can bring with you. You don't need your laptop anymore to carry an npm registry, in case you did that before. So Palomo is this. It looks very hacky, because it is very hacky. Basically what it does, it runs Bolivar, but it runs it on your cell phone instead. Basically, it's just a package registry that you always have on you, because you always have your cell phone. It runs on Android and PC. Not sure why you would run it on PC, but it does. It probably can make it work on iOS as well, somehow. It's built in Golang, and it's using libp2p and IPFS, the Golang version as well, which is why this is possible in the first place. Vashko, I think, might talk about libp2p as well. So it's using IPFS libp2p. Basically, it's peer-to-peer fetching via smartphones. This is a very hacky thing in general. There is a lot of dragons hidden beneath all of this, so it's buggy. It probably is going to drain your battery or something. I haven't really properly tested it yet, but the idea is there. We'll see what happens. This is just a bunch of different ways you can help. Really, you can help any way you feel comfortable helping, or you can help not at all, or you can just talk to people about it, or you can think about it. But yeah, mostly what we need now is just discussions around the ideas, just to be in the GitHub organization and talk with me and talk with the other people and say what you think. There is no wrong ideas. There are no ideas that people are going to laugh at you for. We're all trying to be very collaborative, because in the end, all of this is for the people who are doing FOSS software. And that's it. Yeah.